Hello, it's Gordon here, and this video I've called RIP Sir Ken Dodd, because Ken Dodd died. Did he? No, Doddy? Yes, very sad. Ken Dodd, and that's Sir Ken Dodd, as it happens, knighted for services to the entertainment industry and to charity. Died age 90, and he's been, well, I can say getting older and older for many years. Sounds silly, doesn't it? Of course he has. But he was still performing right up to the end. And I nearly got to see him a couple of years ago in Southend, but the tickets are sold out. It was actually quite hard to get a ticket to a Ken Dodd show because they would sell out pretty quickly. And he's famous for his shows lasting a long time. They would be maybe billed as a 2-hour show, but they would last 3-4 hours. And he would just keep going. And as well as singing his songs, he actually had 18 top 40 hits in the UK, which I know people might know one or two of his songs, Happiness and Tears. He actually had 18 top 40 hits in the UK, and he would sing these in his show as well. And his show was basically one-liners and puns, and it got him in the Guinness Book of Records. In 1974, he did a 3-hour show where he told 10 jokes a minute for 3 hours. Now that's a lot of jokes. And he would write all his jokes down and the audience reactions to them. So after every show he would do a debrief, and he would, for himself, and he would write them all down in these notebooks, because he was a student of comedy and how it worked. And he once said, excuse me, he once said that Freud had said that comedy is an outward expression of the psyche, but Freud never had to play the Glasgow Empire. So, born in 1927 in a suburb of Liverpool called Knotty Ash. And when I was growing up as a little and watched Ken Dodd, I thought Knotty Ash and his Diddy Men was all made up. Now, obviously the Diddy Men was made up, but Knotty Ash actually exists, and that's where he's passed away as well, back home in Knotty Ash. And he'd had a severe chest infection, and looking at the pictures I saw when he came out of hospital, he did look very frail, and if he was on the way out, and he's passed away. Born in 1927, he used to do a lot of clowning as a child, and one of his tricks that he tried was riding a bicycle with his eyes closed, and it didn't turn out that well, and he sustained injuries to his mouth, which gave him this protruding teeth look that he maintained. Obviously was part of his image, was his wonky teeth. And he actually got a scholarship to grammar school, but decided to leave school when he was 14 and got himself a little pushcart, and he would go door to door selling pots and pans. And he said later that if you can sell pots and pans around Liverpool to the housewives, then you can sell anything, and that includes selling jokes. And he had a hankering to get into the entertainment industry, so he got a book about how to teach himself ventriloquism and started out with a dummy that his father had got for him. Started out in the pubs and the clubs and the social halls, etc., etc. And he got his first professional show in Nottingham in the early 50s, 1954. So how old would he have been? 24 by then. So not particularly, that's quite late, starting out of his first professional gig in Nottingham. And he was performed his first gig in Blackpool in 1955, and by 1958 he was headlining in Blackpool. And even back then, Blackpool was the holy grail, I'd say, of the entertainment industry in Britain. And he was headlining in Blackpool only 4 years after his first professional gig. He didn't really have his breakthrough, shall we say, in London until 1965. But when it came, it was a good one, because he headlined at the London Palladium for 42 weeks. Not 42 days, 42 weeks at the London Palladium. From a chap from Liverpool. That's going some, isn't it? And also in 1965, I said he had 18 top 40 hits. In 1965, Tears got to number 1 and stayed at number 1 for weeks and weeks and weeks. So when people say he was at the top of the entertainment tree, a bit like Bruce Forsyth, he was at the top of the entertainment tree in a hugely competitive industry. And Ken Dodd came from the old school, the variety, the music hall school of acts, where they would schlep around the country from venue to venue to venue, building up their act until they got to the level where they would get these residencies. 42 weeks at the London Palladium doesn't bear thinking about, does it? To get to that level of success. And then he just kept going on television, and I'm of the age where I was brought up with watching light entertainment on the BBC. And it's always had a big influence on me because I like the silly stuff and this sort of nostalgia for the variety and light entertainment acts. I remember watching things like the Seaside Special and Ken Dodd's shows. Janice, seen him twice, Janice. Both shows were brilliant, although he wasn't well last year. No, you could tell he hasn't been well for a long time. First time was about 20 years ago, Jan. Now, when did he have his tax fraud case? I think that was in the 90s, where the Inland Revenue sued him for unpaid tax. And I think during the court case, it turned out that he had over £300,000 in cash stacked in his house. And he always insisted in being paid in cash throughout his career. And he would make these trips to Jersey and the Isle of Man with suitcases full of cash. And during the case, it turned out he was painted as quite a sad, lonely old man, a lonely old character. But in fact, he was just private. He wasn't a sad character. He devoted his life to comedy and performing, and comedy and performing was pretty much all he had. I don't think that makes him sad. He's not necessarily a particularly rounded character, but sad, no. But he got acquitted anyway from the case, and he would joke about it ever since. And one of his jokes was that he insisted he didn't owe the Inland Revenue a penny because he lived by the seaside. And my favourite other Ken Dodd joke was that he woke up in the middle of the night and wasn't sure what time it was. So he got his big marching band bass drum, hung it out the window and started banging it. And then someone down the road shouted, "Who's banging that drum at 1:30 in the morning?" So, Ken Dodd, he's gone. Not cool, not fashionable. He didn't do the swearing or the observational comedy. It was all about jokes for him, and he said he didn't do the swearing because he didn't need to do the swearing, and that wasn't for him. And there are plenty of comedians today who don't do the swearing. Not all the comedians are effing and jeffing all over the place. To be honest, a lot of them are, and you don't need to be. You don't need to be offensive to be funny. Being offensive can be funny, but you don't have to be, and it's not unfashionable or sad to be funny without being offensive. There's nothing wrong with it. If people think that being funny without being offensive is uncool, then that says more about them, I think, than these old style comedians. Alan, saw him about 25 years ago. Thought he was going to die laughing, I really did. Where did you see him, Big Al? I said, I'm a bit frustrated that I never made enough of an effort to see him. So I said I nearly saw him a couple of years ago in Southend, but it was sold out. And he didn't really come close enough again for me to go. I did get to see Bruce Forsyth doing his one-man show. I did get to see Norman Wisdom doing his one-man show. And after I missed Buddy Rich back in the early 80s, because I couldn't get anyone to go with me and was umming and ahhing about whether to go myself, decided I'd see him next time he came, and he died and never did come back. I always thought that if I wanted to go and see someone, I would go and see them before they died. And clearly in Ken Dodd's case, even a couple of years ago, he was in his mid to late 80s, and I thought, really, if I'm going to see him, I've got to get it done. Didn't do it that year, and obviously haven't done it since, and missed out. So good, pleased people have got a chance to see him, and lots of people did see him because he was touring. Was he, where are we, 2018? I'm not sure he did any shows in 2018 because he's been in hospital for quite a while, but he was certainly doing shows in 2017. And when he came out of hospital last week, he said to reporters that he was going to go back on tour. When he got himself well again and better again, he was going to go out back on tour. And the reporter said, well, aren't you going to retire? And Ken Dodd said no. And partly it's because these old style comedians never thought about retiring, because going out and touring constantly became ingrained as their way of life. So it wasn't a job for them, it was their life. So the idea of retiring and stopping that to do something else and to live in retirement just didn't make sense to them, because their life was show business and going out and performing. And if they stopped doing the performing, what did they have left? Which is why a lot of performers, remember Tommy Cooper dying on stage, on TV actually, live on TV, and Eric Morecambe and Ken Dodd still going out when they're old and frail. Al says he saw him at Basingstoke. He was on his own for about 3 hours and he wiped us all out. I've never seen such comedy mayhem. Everyone left weakened but smiling. Yes, and superb. There's nothing better actually than watching a live comedy show. Now, I've done a bit of comedy in my time, and there's nothing better, I say, than standing on a stage and seeing a ripple and a wave of laughter going around the audience that you've created. But equally, there's nothing better than being in an audience, in amongst that wave of laughter and this bouncing backwards and forwards between the audience and the performer, because it generates that feel-good factor and releases the endorphins. And seeing of old school comedians, I saw Jim Davidson way back when in Torquay when I was on holiday with my wife. Now that must have been, there's a few jokes there, that must have been about 1990, something like that. And he's a comedian who divides opinion because he can stray to the offensive. Who else have I seen? Jethro, who I saw only in 2016 or 2017 I saw Jethro, and he is about to retire. And I saw Jasper Carrot, who said the only reason he's not on television is because he can't sing and he can't cook. And a lot of these old school comedians who were big on television in the 70s and 80s, who you don't see on television now, people think that they've stopped. They haven't stopped. They're still touring the big theatres, and it's well worth, if there's one of these comedians, if you think of these big comedians, type them into Google, go to their website, see when they're touring, and if they're coming anywhere near you, go and see one of their shows, because you'll be impressed by their stagecraft and the length. Oh, Al Spencer, Max Boyce, yes, I have seen Max Boyce at the Fairfield Halls in Croydon. I'm trying to think when that was. Part of me thinks that he might even have been supporting Norman Wisdom, because I saw Norman Wisdom in Croydon. Surely Max Boyce couldn't have been supporting Norman Wisdom. It could possibly, but anyway, yes. I have seen Max Boyce, who obviously plays on his Welshness and is another old school variety singing as well into his comedy. Go and see these acts. I may well go and see Roy Chubby Brown, who doesn't do as many shows as he used to. Now, he is offensive. His whole act is being dirty, offensive, dirty, filthy and offensive, and he makes no bones about it. And in fact, he says if you don't like it, you can F off. So, but if you like that, you like that. And if there's a comedian called Russell Kane, and in his early days, I saw a documentary of him up in Edinburgh, and he would say that these offensive acts, are they funny? And he would say, well, if the audience is laughing, then by definition, yes, that's funny. Now, you might go on to ask whether the audience are laughing at the jokes and at the act, or are they laughing at the subject of the comedy, which is a subject for debate. But anyway, yes, thinking about Ken Dodd, thanks for the giggles, Sir Ken. Go and see a live act if you get the chance. How long have I had me going? 16 minutes. I slipped into waffle mode. Maybe go and check out Ken Dodd's songs if you've never heard his songs. Happiness is another one of his hits. Happiness, happiness, the greatest gift that I possess. I thank the Lord that I possess the greatest gift of happiness. And then the song lyrics would go on about happiness being a walk in the woods, or watching the sunset over the mountains, or holding hands with the one you love. And the happiness is all around us if we pay attention to the fact it's there and make the effort to absorb it and soak it up. Now, that's the kind of message that, as you would imagine if you've watched me for a long time, that's my kind of message, that you've got to tap into the happiness that we've already got around us. And that's what Ken Dodd's song Happiness is all about. So go and check that out on YouTube if you've never seen it before. Signing off for now. Hope all is well with you. Wishing you as ever health and happiness. And I'll speak to you again soon.